Welcome, everyone. In this presentation, we will review EEG muscle artifacts and how to recognize them during EEG interpretation. Our focus is practical: how muscle-generated activity appears, why it can be misleading, and how to separate it from true cerebral EEG patterns. By the end, the goal is to approach fast, sharp, or irregular EEG activity with more confidence using morphology, field timing, and clinical context together. Next slide, please. Artifact recognition is not simply a technical detail. Muscle activity is one of the most frequent sources of EEG noise, and it can obscure real cerebral rhythms or imitate patterns such as beta activity, spikes, or paroxysmal fast activity. This matters because overcalling artifact may lead to unnecessary concern, while missing true EEG abnormalities hidden beneath artifact may also affect clinical interpretation. A safe EEG reading always combines the tracing with the patient's state, movement, and stimulation context. Next slide, please. Muscle artifacts occur because EEG electrodes record more than brain activity. Movement can disturb electrode contacts and leads, and muscle contraction generates electrical fields that nearby electrodes can detect. Facial and scalp muscles are especially important because they are close to the recording electrodes. When these muscles contract, their electrical activity may appear as fast, high-amplitude activity on the EEG channels, even though the source is not cerebral. Next slide, please. There are several practical clues that help identify muscle artifact. It may appear as brief bursts or persist across longer portions of the recording. It is often maximal over frontal and temporal regions, especially near the frontalis and masseter muscles. The activity is usually fast, sharp, irregular, and high in amplitude, with abrupt onset and offset. Filtering can also change its appearance, sometimes making EMG look more beta-like or spike-like, so the reader should always consider the technical settings. Next slide, please. Muscle-related artifacts include several recognizable subtypes. Surface EMG usually appears as fast, disorganized activity from scalp or facial muscles. Glossokinetic artifact is related to tongue movement and may appear slower or rhythmic, often with a frontal or anterior temporal field. Photomyogenic artifact is a facial muscle response that is time-locked to photic stimulation, while photomyoclonic artifact reflects a broader muscle response that may involve the face, neck, or body. The key question is often simple: what was the patient doing at that moment? Next slide, please. When distinguishing EMG from beta activity, organization is very important. Beta activity is usually more rhythmic and structured, while EMG tends to be sharper, less rhythmic, and more variable. Individual EMG potentials are often extremely brief, sometimes under 20 milliseconds. If the activity becomes very fast, jagged, and merged into irregular bursts, muscle artifact becomes much more likely than physiologic beta activity. Next slide, please. This comparison helps illustrate the difference between genuine cerebral beta activity and muscle artifact. True beta activity is typically lower in amplitude, more rhythmic, and more sinusoidal, often with a more organized distribution. In contrast, severe EMG contamination is high in amplitude, irregular, sharp, and spiky, with a broadband appearance. The inset view is especially useful because it shows the smooth repeating nature of beta activity compared with the jagged and unpredictable morphology of muscle tension. Next slide, please. Muscle artifact and generalized paroxysmal fast activity can both appear abrupt, fast, and high in amplitude, so this distinction requires careful pattern recognition. EMG usually contains a broader mixture of frequencies and appears more disorganized. Paroxysmal fast activity, by contrast, tends to be more organized, more stereotyped, and more reproducible across events. Comparing the pattern across the recording helps prevent overcalling extracranial artifact as epileptiform fast activity. Next slide, please. Here, the contrast between generalized paroxysmal fast activity and muscle artifact becomes clearer. Generalized paroxysmal fast activity has a more monomorphic, synchronous, and organized appearance across widespread channels. Muscle artifact is more polymorphic, jagged, fragmented, and asymmetrical, often concentrated near peripheral or craniofacial muscle regions. This is why topography and morphology should be interpreted together rather than relying only on speed or amplitude. Next slide, please. During photic stimulation, distinguishing photomyogenic artifact from a photoparoxysmal response is especially important. Photomyogenic artifact is usually sharply contoured, often frontal, and time-locked to the flash. It typically stops immediately when stimulation stops and lacks after-going slow waves. Photoparoxysmal responses may occur only at selected stimulation frequencies, may not be perfectly time-locked, and may persist beyond the stimulation period. Timing, persistence, and waveform shape are the key discriminators. Next slide, please. At higher strobe frequencies, photomyogenic artifact may resemble a photic driving response more closely, but its sharper contour and frontal location are important clues. At lower frequencies, the transients may look more obviously like EMG potentials. The practical point is to avoid relying on one feature alone. Instead, assess the field, the exact timing relative to the flash, the waveform morphology, and whether the activity ends with the stimulation. Next slide, please. Glossokinetic artifact is related to tongue movement and can produce rhythmic or monomorphic slow activity, often over bilateral anterior temporal or frontal regions. It may occur with spontaneous tongue movement, swallowing, talking, or nursing in infants. Because it may appear rhythmic, it can be mistaken for cerebral slowing unless the reader correlates the pattern with behavior and recognizes the typical distribution and context. Next slide, please. A practical checklist can prevent many interpretation errors. First, look at the field. Frontal and temporal predominance is common with muscle artifact. Second, check whether the pattern starts and stops abruptly. Third, correlate the tracing with video, movement, talking, swallowing, and stimulation. Fourth, consider how filter settings may have changed the waveform. Finally, compare morphology and rhythmicity before calling the pattern cerebral. Next slide, please. These illustrative examples should be approached as a pattern recognition exercise. Facial muscle artifact is usually fast, high in amplitude, and irregular. Muscle plus movement artifact may combine fast activity with slower shifts or abrupt transients. Photomyogenic artifact follows photic flashes closely and stops when stimulation ends. Glossokinetic artifact is often slower or rhythmic and is linked to tongue movement or swallowing. Recognizing these patterns improves confidence and reduces overinterpretation. Next slide, please. The main take-home message is that muscle artifact is common, clinically important, and often capable of mimicking cerebral activity. It is best recognized by its location, sharp morphology, variability, abrupt onset and offset, and relationship to patient movement or stimulation. A careful EEG reader does not interpret a waveform in isolation. Instead, they observe, correlate, compare, and review the raw tracing carefully before assigning clinical significance. Next slide, please. Thank you for watching this educational presentation from Prof. Mohammadi's teaching archives. The goal of this session was to strengthen practical EEG pattern recognition and support safer interpretation by distinguishing muscle-generated activity from true cerebral EEG abnormalities. I hope these clues help you approach difficult EEG epochs more systematically and confidently.